Allan Cheboi is a senior investigations manager at Code for Africa. He is here so that we talk about information and the kind of information that we are consuming, especially as we head towards the general election, and the impact of that on electoral processes and democracy across Africa. Misinformation, disinformation, malinformation. Allan Cheboi, good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to Kenya's biggest conversation.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, you know, when you hear someone called Senior Investigations Manager, where?
You know, your mind, unbidden, goes to DCI.
It takes you straight to
Yani, you haven't even given it
Mazingira
time.
House, Kiambu Road,
If you're a little
Kinoti.
old, it takes you to another house over there, then another house called Nyati, and suddenly you're thinking, this is not good for me. Yes. But you don't belong to that group.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you are an investigations manager who's not a cop.
Not a cop.
Okay.
So this is mainly because investigations is a very big realm.
Right.
It's mainly associated with government and like DCI and the type that you've mentioned. But even when someone is in academics and you're researching, it's still an investigation because you're questioning facts, right?
Actually, you know how right you are.
Yeah.
Because the person who heads a research program is called a principal investigator.
Yeah.
And the others who support are just called investigators. Yes. So you are right.
That's true.
She's just calling you Detective C.T. Muga. So what is Code for Africa, Allan?
So Code for Africa is a non-government organization, and it's one of the biggest civic tech organizations on the African continent. It incubates several organizations that even in Kenya is largely known. For example, PesaCheck. I know many of the people in Kenya know about PesaCheck as a fact-checking organization looking at cases of mis and disinformation. But Code for Africa itself is much bigger. Like, for example, myself, I'm a manager, but I lead a team called the iLab, which is short for investigative lab. So it's a lab where we try new things on investigative work. And that is where now we find ourselves investigating cases of fake news, or what we call now misinformation, disinformation, and what we are going to talk about today.
But take us through your day from, like, yesterday, you were not here.
Yeah.
So, okay, these are tech guys. They don't report to work at 8.
No, they don't.
So,
But
let's just do a 24 hours. From whatever time you're awake to whatever time you sleep.
Yeah.
What is it that you do?
So personally, what I do whenever I go to work is I look at some of the trends that are happening. Like, for example, now we have a project running looking at the Kenyan elections, and we particularly want to focus on what could change public opinion, and is categorized as fake news or mis or disinformation. So what I would go is maybe I wake up, look at Twitter, you see all these trending topics you normally see. Is there anything that has an indication that is...
hold.
Yeah.
Yani, you wake up, you go to work, and you're looking at Twitter. He kazi ni mzuri sana. Please go on. Yes.
You could be waking up at midday, by the way, just so we're clear.
Yeah, so I look at any trending topics. I flag anything that looks suspicious over that period of time. Same thing happens with my colleagues who work with me. And whenever we come into the office, we brainstorm on what have we seen that is particularly concerning. And then now we start doing some further data analysis. So we do have social media monitoring tools, media monitoring tools, and we are able to now start building what we call hate speech lexicon or disinformation lexicon. These are lists of keywords that if, Eric, you use this keyword, I'll be able to actually flag you when you use that on social media. So we particularly do that. We do the monitoring. At the end of the day, we do the full analysis of the day to find out what has been the situation. Has there been any particular mis or disinformation being shared on social media or on the media? And then now we write our reports to inform our partners.
What informs you that something could be suspicious? Because I think you're looking at it now with a different eye, right? Because if I'm reading the news, if we're reading the news here, we're looking at then, could it be true? But you're looking at it from, could it be suspicious?
Yeah.
You see? So if I see a picture of something and there is melee on the Thika superhighway, for example, I'll look at the picture and say, actually, you know what? This is not true because there's a different colored bus. It could not be 2022.
Yeah.
It could not be 2022 because these buses are not in operation anymore. So I look and say, okay, this is probably a picture that somebody lifted from somewhere else. It's not current.
Yeah.
So how are you looking at these things that come to you on through which lens are you looking at to say, okay, this
It's
is suspicious.
Yeah, definitely. So maybe just to explain further, the difference between fact checking and the kind of work we do is that fact checkers look at the content. So if they look at Facebook or Twitter and they see a post that is false, like you're mentioning, they will debunk it. So what they do is they verify it with the authorities, with people who actually know what the real information is, and they give factual information. So that's what you always see as this is false, this is true, whenever you look at fact checks. So how we approach it at the iLab is we look at suspicious networks or coordinated people who are working in a coordinated way. So like a trending hashtag on Twitter that is kind of passing us a particular message. Like recently we saw, that there was a trending hashtag saying no Raila, no peace. So you start asking yourself what is that hashtag passing as a message? Then now, is there any coordinated amplification? So like, are there people behind it that are trying to amplify that specific messaging? So for us, we look at more of the networks and the people behind it. We are trying to identify the key actors rather than the individual pieces of content. The content will be part of it, that will be misinformation, but we try to look at the drivers. So what is really behind this machine called mis and disinformation.
And what do you find? What do you, like in this particular case, no Raila, no peace, you wake up and find this hashtag is actually among the top 2, top 3, top 4. Then you start digging into who's behind it. Are there, several accounts that are amplifying it deliberately? Are you able to determine why? Or the game plan?
Definitely. So there are several cases. So there are several things that we always pick up. One of the most important one is that even in Kenya, and we've seen it happening in several other elections in Africa, including the most recent Nigerian elections. But here in Kenya, we've seen an industry of professional pundits. I might call them pundits because these are people who are paid to amplify particular messaging. It could be not disinformation, but at the end of the day, it's messaging that you want some of the people to see and to change perception of some of the Kenyans. It's only when it comes to a realm when it's now disinformation is where now we are very concerned about it, or hate speech for that matter. So we always find evidence of like people who are actually being paid. I'm sure there are several reports that have been put out there where we are seeing this happening. We also see the situation where people are doing, so we call it trend manipulation. So people are trying to game Twitter's trending algorithms to actually make these hashtags trend. And that is something that is happening here in Kenya at the moment. We're also seeing evidence of a very concerted effort to drive people off platforms such as Facebook or Twitter into WhatsApp, into Telegram, which then becomes even more concerning because like for an investigator like myself, I'm able to actually analyze data that is on Facebook or on Twitter. But when it shifts to WhatsApp and Telegram, then it kind of blinds investigators.
It's a closed network, so you are not able really to tell how many people are seeing it and where it's spreading.
Yeah.
So in these particular cases, for example, when you talk about there are people who could be trying to game the algorithms, how do they do that?
So normally when you look at Twitter, and of course I don't have like the nitty-gritty understanding of how Twitter's trending algorithm works, but for something to trend in Kenya, you would probably need about 1,000 tweets, right? Or about 1,500. And you'd see that starting get picked up on
with the same keyword.
Yes, with the same keyword. So like with a hashtag or using a particular keyword as So we've started seeing several indicators where we call it poll-based amplification. So you wake up, you look at the hashtag, and it says retweet for this person, like for this person. That is basically an amplification strategy, because if Eric amplifies that, CT goes and says, retweet or like, because you're driven by your own intuition on what you need to vote for, right, between those two. But what happens is that you realize that there is a hashtag that has been accompanied on that message. And that way you start realizing that this hashtag is now trending because of this retweet. So those are some techniques that are being used. We are already starting to see evidence of people who are saying, the first 200 people to like this, you'll win lunch. You see, like that amplifies the information at the end of the day. So those are some of the things we are picking up at the moment as strategies to actually game this algorithm.
So when you pick something up and you say that you're trying to then, when you see something suspicious, and then you start to look at the drivers of this. So whom are you looking at, for example? Are you looking for the person who would have started a hashtag, for example? Are you looking at the subject of the thing that is trending in this case? Like you said, no Raila, no peace. Are you looking for the subject himself? May he have said something over the last week then that would have spurred this emotion on to then create this hashtag?
Yeah.
What exactly do you look at then for us to know whether or not this particular trend was true?
Yeah, definitely. So most of the trends we see online, most of them will have like an offline like source, ideally, because even the Jacaranda case that happened recently, it led to a spike in like the mentions of the name Jacaranda itself, and Jacaranda was reason to trending topics. So that means offline decisions and things that happen offline actually have an impact on the online spaces. So what we try to look at is, first of all, has there been an offline event that could trigger people to start a conversation around this? If there was no offline event and something is actually trending and it's concerning, then I would now be particularly interested in who is behind this specific trend, yeah? And maybe just to walk back, and I think it might be important to just cover, to understand what is the difference between the three words that you mentioned, mis, dis, and malinformation, for us to understand the drivers at the end of the day, right? So misinformation is basically information that someone shares without knowing it's false. So I would probably receive a WhatsApp message with false information, and I see, okay, let me help my family members in my WhatsApp group. This looks like really interesting information, and you forward it to the WhatsApp group.
Right.
That is misinformation because I'm not deliberately sharing it to harm the recipients of that information. But this information is more concerning, and this is now what we focus on, particularly because this is where deliberate effort is used to actually deceive the recipient of that specific information. So it is deliberate. Like this is someone who actually sits down, creates a campaign, and launches it to deceive either citizens or even individual people. Malinformation is particularly interesting because it's like cases where true information is actually used is shared to the public with ill intentions. So it might be like you've seen cases of political opponents sharing nudes about each other, sharing information that is really, really private about each other. So that is malinformation. So these two are the most high risk in terms of like the drivers of mis and disinformation, or fake news as people call it. So once you understand that disinformation is a very, very critical thing for us to focus on, then now you try to see if this is deliberate. Who do I need to be focusing on? If you see a trending hashtag, who do I need to be focusing on? So what we do, we use social media network analysis to try and find out who started the trend, for example. And that will be an interesting account to us. Then
Are you able to tell where a trend started?
Yes.
You can track back and see. So we are already past 1,000 tweets.
Yes.
But you can see the original tweet.
Yes.
Okay.
So if I enter that hashtag in our social media monitoring tools, I just need to look for the first post mentioning the hashtag, right? So they're becoming smarter. They delete the first one, but yeah, those are loopholes we have to navigate through. But we can identify the first person to actually post a hashtag. We can identify influencers who end up retweeting a particular post, and because they have a very huge following, then it gets spike. There is a spike in now the number of people who see it. We can identify people who actually try to amplify it. We've now started seeing people creating bot accounts on Twitter to actually amplify such kind of messages. And once we identify specific accounts of interest, we now walk back and see forensically who are these accounts linked to. And whose interests are they serving? And then now you walk back from that and you start now deciding now, is there any influence, we call it influence operation. You're trying to influence the public opinion. Is there an influence operation behind this specific trend that we are seeing?
Have you come across such, where there's actually money that's been put aside to send a certain message or to influence people's perceptions about a certain issue, especially when it comes to this politics, as we are running the politics now?
Yeah, we have. I wouldn't want to mention names right now, but we have, and even starting in the 2017 elections, you remember about the case about Cambridge Analytica. that was particularly interesting because they even the leadership of Cambridge Analytica were kind of caught in hidden camera saying that we did sponsor XXX. So we try to imagine now in this specific election so far, how do we walk back and identify those people that are actually sponsoring this? And then through the media, we now kind of say, this is what is happening. Kenyans need to be aware of this thing that is happening. And then now you kind of do mass education. And yeah, because at the end of the day, I know it is a political game, right? Using mis and disinformation and propaganda is still a political game that people are using. Yeah.
There's this issue of what you're referring to as a game being acceptable. But then there's a line here where it is illegal.
Yeah.
So how do you determine that, fine, it's skirting thinly on the fence, it's walking on fairly thin ice, and at what point do you determine that this thing is outrightly illegal and it's prosecutable?
So unfortunately for us, I don't think the Kenyan law allows for us to really tackle that. We are now partnering with NCIC to just figure out ways and methodologies of now kind of leading to prosecution, if need be, for people who cross that specific line. And NCIC has a very, very interesting way of determining those specific events. So what we do is we help with the analysis. We kind of bring out all the indicators around a particular issue, and we work with NCIC to now figure out where is it now, for example, hate speech. Hate speech is something that crosses the line. If someone goes online and says, we need to remove this kind of people from this region because they historically don't belong here, and uses those coded words we've seen before, that now crosses the line at the end of the day. And it's now considered as hate speech, which is bias on a ethnic profiling. And that means that now it becomes concerning even to government entities, and it now goes to a point where it needs to be taken in action. But now there is something that we've seen as a limitation at the end of the day, whereby my recommendation is usually, why don't we have this included in the electoral code of conduct, whereby for a politician to participate in elections, you have to sign this code of conduct that says you can't do X, Y, Z. And this elections code of conduct is now like a Bible for us to say, and there is consequences. So the only thing I need to mention is there needs to be provided consequences for this.
Should you breach the code?
Should you breach this
But
happens.
then, they'll come in and say, I'm not the one who actually started this. I am not aware. There's a bunch of people who started this misinformation or disinformation campaign.
Yeah.
I am not,
I'm not
I
personally.
totally disassociate myself from these people. They'll do that.
Yeah, that's true.
Signing a code of conduct, really, okay, it could take us at a certain step, but probably it's identifying the notorious people and then the DCI doing the job that they ought to be doing.
Yeah. That's true. And I think that's where we are now. That's why you're seeing people starting to get prosecuted for that kind of amplification and campaigns.
But sorry, go ahead and do.
I'm curious to know then, what action is taken after you come in the morning and you find that there's suspicious things doing the trend? What you then do with the information once you found that, hold on a minute, this is a bit dodgy, and then you do your trace back. What happens then?
Yeah.
To deal with the issue.
So we approach it in two ways. Our investigations give findings in two levels. So the first thing is we identify the trends and what we call the tactics and the narratives that are being shared by these individuals. And then we try to counter it by now sharing with the public the factual information around that particular issue. Yeah. So like recently we saw cases of amplification of narratives that are trying to discredit an institution like the IEBC. Yeah. So that is definitely concerning. If you do an investigation and you find that these accounts that are spreading this type of information are fake accounts, you can't even really track who this person is. We do hand over that to authorities for them to now do the forensic work and track them, because we don't have the mandate to do that kind of investigations and to arrest anyone at the end of the day, right? So we do hand over the cases, we call them cases, to entities like the NCIC for them to liaise with the DCI to follow up on that. But as Code for Africa, as an NGO, we try now to work with partners to share the correct messaging from the narratives that we are seeing online, which I think that is more impactful, because you need to now figure out where is this conversation heading? And how can you tell Kenyans this is actually not true? And we now need to focus on this information that is true. Yeah.
Time for a break. 8:30. This is Kenya's biggest conversation. Allan Cheboi is a senior investigations manager at Code for Africa. We are talking about misinformation, disinformation, malinformation, and the impact that is having on elections and democracy, not only in our country, but across the continent.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Our guest this morning is Allan Cheboi. He's a senior investigations manager at Code for Africa. We're talking about the impact of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation on elections and democracy in the continent. City.
What I was wondering was, I'm listening to what you're saying. Does it not mirror what NIS also does? And just asking.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm asking that, is there a way in which the two of you complement each other? Because it is, the spectrum of investigations is broad.
Yeah.
Now, they look at other things that you probably don't look into. But again, the question, is it possible for these services to be complementary? You're already working with NCIC, government body. This other one also, government body.
That's an interesting question. But yes, I do agree that both of that is intelligence gathering.
Yes.
Like basically the core concept of the work we do on researching mis and disinformation is gathering intelligence. And this intelligence enables us to now counter any impact of that mis and disinformation. So I do agree that partnering between different agencies that do the same work is okay, but for us, we do focus more on open source information, or open source intelligence. And this means this is information that any other person can be able to find, any other person can be able to redo an investigation that I do using the methodologies that I have. So we try to focus more on that realm where it is open for everyone, it is transparent for everyone to see how we did it, why we arrived at these specific conclusions, which I think it might be different for NIS.
Not might, is.
So we're in election season, many people calling it silly season, crazy's day out kind of thing. So there's a lot of things flying around. What are some of the trends that you've seen so far? And are they likely to get, even stickier as we're going closer to August 9th?
Yeah, definitely. We're actually seeing an increase or a pickup of all the trends. So we've been monitoring this since 2020. So that is as far back as, about two years ago. Actually, our first report on social media network analysis targeting electoral processes was in 2020, I think July of 2020. And at that time, our core finding was that at that specific point in time, networks had started being created to amplify this kind of conversations. So we do expect that as we near the election period, August 9, this will particularly increase. And that is why we are trying to amplify this messaging out there as quickly as possible, so that by the time it reaches August 9th, Kenyans have that informed decision. Some of the things we are picking up at the moment. So one of the key things is that trend manipulation is something that is happening, as I mentioned, trend manipulation, and that is very concerning to us because then it gets the eyes of very many people. The second thing that we've seen is, as I mentioned, paid propaganda machines. So these are people who are paid to actually spread this propaganda. And we need to now figure out how do we counter such kind of efforts. And then number 3 is we've now seen platforms such as TikTok being now the heaven for mis and disinformation. So it's starting to, or hate speech, it's starting now to become more vibrant on platforms such as TikTok. And why is that? It's because many people are now embracing TikTok as a social media platform. We've seen political strategists or influencers targeting that specific platform because many of the youth are always on TikTok every morning, every evening. Yeah. The only disadvantage about TikTok is these are videos. So you need probably machine learning systems for you to figure out what is this person talking about. Yeah. So it's not text-based like Twitter, where you can just do keyword searches and you find the information. So on TikTok, it's much more challenging. And that's why we challenge platforms such as TikTok to actually find ways to curb that as early as possible. Yeah. So Facebook and Twitter always releases what we call takedown reports, and these are network takedown reports. They always release them, and they even released one for the Uganda election. And just to give a mention is that in the Uganda election, you remember Facebook was actually banned.
Yes.
And why was that? It's because they attributed a particular influence campaign to a government body, the Ministry of, I think, ICT in Uganda. So that type of impact can even originate from the government itself. So it's not only people who are just out there.
So just opposition.
Yes. Yes.
So at Code for Africa and iLab, who pays you to do all this work that you're doing?
Yeah, so at the moment, for the work we are doing in Kenya, we are being funded by the UNDP, the United Nations Peace and Development body, which is mandated to kind of not even investigate, to kind of ensure there is peace in different partner countries, right? And we are also in partnership with the United Nations Office of Human Rights, so the Commission of Human Rights. So both of those bodies are supporting us to work together with the NCIC to actually do this specific research within the nation.
How long have you been doing it?
Personally, I've been doing it for 3 years.
Okay.
How
long have you been monitoring what's happening?
In
doing
Kenya.
social listening, yeah.
In Kenya,
for this particular in Kenya.
In Kenya, it's since 2020.
Okay.
Yes.
So within this time, because we know, like you said, as we head towards August 9th, you're likely to see an increase and an amplification of this kind of activities.
Yeah.
When would you say this started for this particular election? When did you start seeing organized groups or organized gangs spreading and spreading this information, disinformation and malinformation?
I think it's been going on. It's just that during, like, even since 2017, it's really been going on because political campaigns start very early. That is, like, for a fact. You don't expect it to start right now because it's August 9th, just in the next few days. It actually started so early. As early as 2017, people had started building mechanisms to support themselves in terms of this specific messaging. So, like, for example, the case I mentioned about the drive from Facebook to Twitter to WhatsApp, evidence shows that it started actually back in 2018, where groups started being formed, very specific groups. You'll see political party Nyeri. So I'll give an example of, let's say, UDA Nyeri, ODM Embakasi Central. And these are WhatsApp groups that links are shared on Facebook, links are shared on Twitter, and they're telling people, join this for us to have additional conversations here. And this is where political campaigns are now even being managed. So political strategists, in a click of a button, who is on the top national level, just types a message, sends it to a group of people who now share it and disseminate it. And that's strategic, right, at the end of the day.
So if you look at it, then that sounds very strategic. That sounds like something that you do innocently because you need to spread information. You need to target your recipients of your information.
Yeah.
At what point would you say money actually started being spent for disinformation campaigns?
I think just, running these resources is not easy. Like, if you're managing 1,000 WhatsApp groups, it's not easy and it takes resources, right? So I would say since when they were starting to be created, there were people who were already being paid to do that. And as I mentioned, our first report on social network analysis, and it was looking at a coordinated network on Twitter trying to share this information, was actually back in 2020. So as early as then, people had already started being paid to do this type of thing. And even on Twitter, there are lists that have been created of individuals who call themselves premium Twitter assassins. And that basically means these are people you can hire, you can reach out to them, pay them for them to amplify your information, whether true information, which is okay, but now when it's concerning or not, yeah.
As you analyze it, I mean, in your mind's eye, then you can start to see the dangers of this kind of activity.
Yeah.
However, and I think there are those who are asking the question, what's the big deal?
What's the big deal?
What's the big deal? I mean, come on. It's social media, we're putting stuff out there, you consume the information, So what are the dangers of these kind of things? And then why is it important to really then be on the lookout in terms of what we're consuming?
Yeah. Definitely. So one thing we know is that social media is a medium, and when you look at traditionally, radio and TV was the medium being used by politicians to incite the public, right? And incitement comes in different mechanisms. It can be in the form of hate speech, which is direct attack on, let's say, communities or religion or something like that. Disinformation and misinformation can be a form of incitement because you can use disinformation to target a particular opponent. That person does the same, then you mobilize people and it creates violence at the end of the day. So it is risky. It is something that, of course, everyone needs to be concerned about. The other thing is it actually shapes the opinion of the voter. It actually changes the mind of the voter. I usually say, what do you think you see all these billboards on the streets whenever you're driving, whenever you're going to work, whenever you're coming? Why do you see that? It's because the human brain is kind of it's kind of given a way that if you see something so many times, then it tends to be now a reality for you.
Yeah.
And that is all everything every people are doing,
Imprinting.
even on imprinting.
Conditioning.
Yes. Conditioning.
Yes.
So that is the risk. So you can actually use social media to change public opinion on policies, not only even on elections, even on policies that really matter, even on things that are actually driving the country itself.
So if you see a hashtag, for example, and then explanations underneath about, whatever, no whomever, no peace, and you see that regularly enough, then what we are saying essentially is that the message becomes very clear that this individual then can then be connected with a situation of no peace.
Yeah.
And that would then affect the way that you operate later, or even affect the manner in which you would vote.
Definitely.
Yeah. Before social media, disinformation and malinformation still existed.
It did.
In various other forms. In the village setting, in waking up in the morning and someone has just gone out and started saying, so and so insulted women.
Yeah.
And it spreads at local community level. Word of mouth, people sitting in, at shopping centers. They just
gossip.
Just
Chairman.
local gatherings, yes.
it just spreads and spreads and spreads.
Yeah.
And there's a way in which people have dealt with it and known how to adjust to it.
Yeah.
Are people getting to that level from your observation over the years? Are people getting more and more aware of being more alert of looking out for disinformation and malinformation?
Yeah, I would say yes, especially whenever something is highlighted as mis or disinformation, or something has those characteristics. So like the normal Kenya has become like really aware about misinformation and disinformation. Yeah, they've become woke about it. And I'll give an example. So recently we did an assessment of the mentions of the word madoadoa on Twitter.
Yeah.
And you remember Linturi didn't mention madoadoa early in the year. I think it was in February, I believe.
Yes.
And Raila mentioned it recently. So we did a comparison of what was the reception of such kind of a mention, because madoadoa is traditionally or historically associated with hate, and like you remember the case. So what we realized is that majority of the people were doing three things. Number one, they were questioning, why is this person using this key term? Because it is not a good key term. And that is what we really want to achieve. Why the public actually questioning why this is it. Although we had a minority of the people who actually were saying the context is not in the way that
It's a different context.
It's a different context. Either way, given that the majority were really against or condemning the action of using that keyword, that tells you a lot that people actually woke. Yeah.
How about in consuming information? I mean, the same way you say, be alert on if you see this question, question the source, question the integrity of the information that you're reading. Are people doing that before the forward has received?
Yeah, so I think, people within cities such as Nairobi, Mombasa, Kisumu, I think that's happening because there's a lot of training, there's a lot of awareness that is being run. So what we are trying to do at the moment, and especially for this election, is we know in the grassroots level, people will still see a fake video and they will believe it. People will still see a manipulated image of someone holding a panga and they will believe it. So how do we reach those levels? That is actually the main question, because people within cities already know and they kind of have that idea. Okay, not everyone, but majority. But now how do we reach the grassroots level? So actually we did partner with Shujaz Inc. and AIfluence on this project specifically. And the reason we did that is because we are trying, Shujaz has like youth ambassadors on the grassroots levels of Kenya. AIfluence, you have micro-influencers on those really grassroots levels. And we're trying now to share that messaging through them so that we are able to reach that normal person.
NCIC has flagged some hotspots and said these ones, you're likely to have incidences of violence based on historical issues and also based on what has been happening.
Yeah.
Are you noticing the same, mirroring in terms of your monitoring, mirroring what NCIC has been saying?
Yeah, definitely.
Like you would see a spike in the kind of information being shared in, say, Kericho County, in some parts of Nairobi, in some parts of Marsabit County, some parts of Uasin Gishu County?
Yeah, so what we do is, in just the way NCIC has flagged these places, what we try to do is we map the campaign trails of the different candidates, and then we use our social media monitoring tools to enter those keywords and then try to correlate those with the NCIC hotspots. So where are we seeing these spikes? And does it correspond to the NCIC announcement on the hotspots? And we do see that correlation, because this is where now, of course, different political leaders go out there and talk about particular statements that now get amplified on online spaces. And at the end of the day, you see that definitely correlates.
You know, political leaders probably have people who have the sort of knowledge you have, and people who have other knowledge about, as you say correctly, the human mind and how to influence it. And even when they speak, it isn't careless. It is targeted. And they know that this sort of message will resonate with this group of people whom I am speaking with. Now, the intervention for behavior change that is required for people to hear this message and question it. Talk about it a little bit. What is it that you people are doing, your organization and others whom you associate with, so that you may not be able to stop this messaging, but you can get people to pause and question it?
Yeah, definitely. So what we are trying to do at the moment is the skill sets that we have at the moment, we are actually trying to replicate it through the media. So the media is the watchdogs of the information environment, right? So, and it makes sense for the media to be able to actually do this more efficiently and a very fast pace, for them to be able to share the correct information with the public. That is the first thing, because the media kind of holds that mandate. Then the second thing is the little knowledge that you need just to do a very simple verification of information. That's what we are trying now to seed into the citizen. Like, we are trying to tell them, when you see a picture, question it and look at, ask. First of all, and I think there are several initiatives. First, look, question it before even forwarding it, right? So those are several initiatives. There are several initiatives, and I'm sure not only us. Fumbua is actually doing a very good job for that. I think there are several initiatives in Kenya at the moment that are actually doing that specific activity. I think that is the most important, as you mentioned.
Is there a fear then that you would have an overly suspicious society? That anything then that came your way, then you're questioning? Or is that the way we ought to be?
We ought
With
to
the
be.
way things have, evolved over time, then we ought to be suspicious about anything that comes our way. Can we live like that?
I think you need to have that curiosity to just question any information, especially when you see it can be triggering to you. There is information you can't consume. Anything that doesn't make you kind of emotionally want to do something, emotionally want to hold a panga and go to the streets and throw stones. If you see something that can make you do that specific action, you need to at least question it first. So that's what we want to do. It's not question everything, but anything can trigger you. Anything that can trigger you, you need to question it. Just take a pause, question it, do some further verification.
There's still a lot that we need to learn about, especially use of social media and digital platforms to spread propaganda and to try and manipulate people's perceptions. And we thank you because you've shared quite a bit with us. Your parting shot as you speak to people now in about 30 seconds.
Yeah.
What is it that you tell someone to look out for when they're consuming information on digital platforms?
Yeah. So I would say number one is, if you can see something that can make you take a particular action that at the end of the day might be harmful to your next neighbor, question it first. Verify it, and then now share it if you conclusively find that it is something that you can share. So that's
Your
the first
conscience
thing.
is clear.
Yes. Don't ever forward any message that you haven't verified and you know it has the capability of influencing the actions and the opinions of the next person that you're sharing. Don't be a conduit for misinformation.
All right. Thank you very much, Allan, for joining us. Thank you. Allan Cheboi is a senior investigations manager at Code for Africa. We've been talking about this. It's part of the Fumbwe initiative that brings together several organizations, and SpiceFM is now part of it, where we are highlighting the dangers of misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation as we head towards the general election, and even thereafter, as we live our lives.